So Israel and Hamas are out fighting each other again. Must be a Tuesday. Israel and Hamas kind of remind me of two guys that just got to get into a fight every couple weeks or until they tire themselves out, just to remember that they're men. These fights between Israel and Hamas always seem to go the same way. Hamas fires a bunch of rockets, and then Israel decides to bomb a couple buildings and do some demolition work. And that's usually about it. Then everybody decides to go home. But apparently, things have escalated a little bit past that point this time. It seems as though Hamas has fired up to 430 rockets as of maybe Saturday. And their rockets that they have now apparently have a longer range than they did in the past. And that, of course, opens up new targets to them that are perhaps less well fortified and defended than the locations that are sort of within Hamas's traditional range. Now, the Egyptians, for their part, as they often try to play, have been urging both sides to come to the negotiating table to try and mediate some kind of ceasefire, which normally happens pretty quick. However, it's quite concerning. The Egyptians say that neither side, Netanyahu nor Hamas, are looking to come to the negotiating table, which of course means that this fighting will continue indefinitely, from what I can understand, or at least until Hamas is exhausted. Because I'm pretty certain that Hamas can't outlast the Israelis. I mean, Israel just has so many more resources with regards to weaponry. I mean, the game of war really is to kill the other guy faster than he's killing you. Short of total annihilation, the way that you win a war is by convincing the other side that you are going to be able to kill them at a much faster rate. I mean, that's why Blitzkrieg was so effective. It paralyzed people because it was quick. And the Israelis learned from that. I mean, that's how they won their war of independence. The Israelis know that if they are somewhat brutal on the front side of this conflict, as soon as Hamas starts something, they go in and they kill a lot of people and they level quite a few buildings, then that should shock the Gazans into trying to put pressure back on Hamas to back down. But based on the way Hamas is talking, that's not working this time, because Hamas says essentially that they're fed up and that they see no other resolution for them, that there's no way to work with the Israelis, that they've exhausted all diplomatic channels, and that they think now that the only thing they can do is just try and fight with all they have. Now, if these guys are on a suicide mission, that doesn't bode too well for the folks in Gaza. Hamas's argument is that the Israelis have been bombing civilian targets in Gaza for quite some time, and no matter how many times they ask them to stop, the Israelis keep bombing people's houses. And so Hamas thinks that now their only recourse then is to try and blow up some Israeli houses and hope that maybe the Israelis will quit that way if they have a taste of their own medicine. Now, I know there are going to be people in the comments shouting at me that what Israel does when they bomb houses is that they are actually bombing places where Hamas stores weapons, and that Hamas uses civilians as human shields, blah, blah, blah. And that may or may not be true in all cases. It's very difficult for me to know that, considering I'm not on the ground, and you can't trust a lot of reporters on this particular issue. But let's just say that if the Israeli Air Force is even 10% as sloppy as the United States military, then they've probably hit quite a few targets that were not necessarily secret military targets. I would not be surprised at all if you could find, somehow with a crystal ball, looking back into the past, a number of homes that the Israelis have bombed that didn't end up actually having Hamas weapons caches in them. And of course, every time something like that happens, Israel ends up creating much more of a problem for itself, because you end up radicalizing every member of that family who survived. Kids who perhaps were off at school and came home to find their parents dead and their home destroyed, they probably are pretty easy recruits for when they grow up to fight the war against Israel. And besides, if you're born into Gaza, there's really nothing else you can do other than fight Israelis. Folks in Gaza are pretty much stuck there. There's not a great deal of flow of international trade. I think there's a 6 nautical mile limit to how far out they can take their boats. So if this endless cycle of conflict is ever going to close, the Israelis were going to have to pursue some kind of a different strategy, because containment can be quite a messy policy when you have your own civilians living just outside the borders of this zone that you're trying to contain. The dilemma that the Israelis are in here is that The only way that they're going to get the Gazans to somehow simmer down and stop trying to fight as much is if the Israelis loosen their grip, because what these people feel is they feel that they feel the noose being tightened around their neck, and they don't like that. So they fight back violently to try and shake off the yoke of Israel. However, every time they do that, that gives the Israelis more justification in tightening the noose, while at the same time then giving the Gazans more of a reason to rebel. So this really is an endless cycle until one of them breaks. And considering that Netanyahu's been in power for so many, multiple decades at this point, you would think that he would have thought through some kind of long-term strategy of trying to de-escalate the war with Gaza, like perhaps structuring your security policy in such a way that it doesn't make Gaza appear like a prison from the outside. If the people in Gaza had some modicum of autonomy with respect to international affairs, it would be much more difficult for folks within that, you can't really call it a country, within that zone to blame the Israeli government for all their problems. But as they see it, the restrictions on international trade and on fishing and all that are very direct problems with their standard of living that they can tie back to Israel. So I think if the Israelis want to de-escalate this in any way, what they would probably be best doing is continuing to fortify their border with Gaza and, just build a big wall and try and pretend they're not there, and let the Gazans import and export whatever they want and fish wherever they want. However, if they, as the Israelis claim, will use their freedom of international trade to, import weapons and then try and attack Israel, retaliate against them with no mercy, so that then perhaps they'll learn that they can't do that. Because no matter how many weapons you let into Gaza, there's no way that the folks in Gaza and Hamas are going to be able to challenge the Israelis militarily. So I don't think letting them arm up is that bad of an idea from the perspective of the Israelis even. I think it would be very much worth it, considering that the Israelis would then be taking away some of the Hamas talking points, which again, I'm not necessarily picking a side here because this is a very complicated issue, but it is a fact that the Israeli military has a pretty good stranglehold on Gaza, and it's true that people right now, if they're born into Gaza, have no opportunities. Yeah, so that's my solution. Completely close the border crossings between Gaza and Israel and build a big wall around there just like they did with the West Bank. But then let Gaza be independent and stop blocking their fishing boats and trying to starve them out by not letting any trade get through to the country. Let them run their own finances and their own affairs and see what happens from there. So if you gained anything of value out of this video, I'd appreciate you clicking that like button and subscribing. And if you do subscribe, make sure to click the bell because I do upload every day and I'd hate to have you miss one. So I guess I'll see you folks back here tomorrow.